Andor Season 2 now right on the horizon, I think it's time to talk about how Tony Gilroy actually dropped the in-real-life historical comparison for one Director Orson Krennic earlier this year. In the January 2025 Empire article, Tony Gilroy compared Krennic to Robert Moses. This comparison not only adds an entirely new layer to what we've seen of Krennic thus far in Rogue One and Catalyst, but I think also indicative of the direction that Krennic will continue to go in Andor Season 2 as he continues to climb the bureaucratic structure of the ISB. Let's dive into the history of Robert Moses and break down how this comparison could potentially be used moving forward in Andor Season 2. This is finally how I get to talk about Imperial tax structure. Robert Moses was an urban planner whose ambitious projects made him the dominant figure in the development of New York City throughout the mid to early 20th century. He is largely responsible for how New York City looks today. During his reign as New York City's master builder from 1934 to 1968, Moses developed a vast plan that sought to modernize the city's infrastructure, expand the public realm with recreational facilities like parks, and remove blight from residential areas. Throughout his career, he built nearly 700 miles of roads, including expressways and parkways, built 20,000 acres of parks and public beaches, 7 new bridges, including the Triborough Bridge, which connects Manhattan, Queens, and the Bronx. And he was responsible for many other iconic elements of New York City, including the Central Park Zoo, Lincoln Center, and the UN. Throughout his career, he also held numerous political positions that had both municipal and governmental power, including but not limited to New York Secretary of State, New York City Park Commissioner, head of the New York City Planning Commission, but most importantly, the chair of the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority. Moses' legacy was just to end there. Then as Krennic would say, we were on the verge of greatness. As we stand amidst his achievements, Moses' legacy both was and is extremely controversial. While planning, Moses had an alleged penchant for drawing 2 straight lines across a map and then bulldozing everything in between. His approach to urban development was not only ambitious and aggressive, it was also highly destructive. Because he held so many political positions throughout his 40-year career, he basically leveraged unchecked power to build these grandiose monuments, in the process destroying the fabric of New York itself. In order to get these massive projects of both scope and scale completed in a timely manner, Moses utilized a very specific tactic. He would start projects that were almost 100% certain to cost more than the initial funding by the New York State legislature, which he did because he knew it would force the legislature to eventually fund the full project, lest it looked like they had ineffective oversight. Throughout his 40-year rule, Moses expanded his influence, both political and otherwise, in a few specific ways. It was the classic trifecta of manipulation, clandestine backdoor deals, and then just blatant threats. He was known to hire people to compile entire dossiers of his rivals in case he needed to blackmail them. The extent of his overreach is best exemplified in a way that feels like egregiously Star Wars. Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority wasn't just like an agency that was responsible for the operations of the bridge itself. It acted as literally Robert Moses' shadow government in New York City. It's headquartered privately on Randall's Island with its own flag and police force. Most importantly, though, it had an entirely separate stream of revenue, which was the tolls that people paid to cross the bridge. It was both illegal and monopolistic in a way that is incomparable today. Further compounding all of that, the most important part of his legacy is that Moses also built his infrastructure in a very deliberate way. It was a fairly common sentiment at the time that Moses cared more for cars than people. So he not only completely ignored the need for public transit, his car-centric infrastructure, which went both around and throughout New York City, led to the complete destruction of entire communities, which displaced hundreds of thousands of working class and minority families. And his infrastructure itself was also riddled with further subversive details. He deliberately built expressways with low clearances so that way buses wouldn't be able to access the nicer parts of both the city and the state. Overall, Moses' legacy is a lot, and historians often refer to it as feeling very technocratic. Which brings us back to the man, the myth, the legend, Orson Krennic. As we stand in the midst of Krennic's achievements, I think it's fairly easy to draw some strong initial parallels. In particular, the way that Krennic was extremely adept at manipulating people. The novel Catalyst focuses upon the history of Galen Erso and Krennic's relationship up through Rogue One. In the book, we learned that even at a young age, when Krennic and Galen Erso were in the Republic's Futures program, which was essentially a separate school for gifted and talented students who are probably now all burnt out and have ADHD. Krennic built a reputation as someone who could be the interface between the ones with power and financing and the ones who could calculate and construct and make dreams come true. Krennic was a master builder, just like Moses, which naturally brings up the whole financing parallel. In Andor Season 2, we know that Krennic is going to be dealing with the fact that the Death Star is not only over budget, but it's behind on schedule. In addition to trying to handle one dead Ramiro. According to the Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, the Empire itself was funded by a tax structure that largely favored pretty much just industrial conglomerates and the wealthy. Citizens paid for their own subjugation. It was in no way very familiar to anything today. Because of the Aldhani heist in Port that allowed the Empire to continue to basically breach their fiduciary duty to their citizens even more. Taxation rate of 5 times the Aldhani payload could be leveraged against any planet or system that was then said to be harboring partisan activities, which was largely left undefined for a reason. Because of the sheer scope of trying to fund the Death Star, we know that the industrial conglomerates like KDY and Scanner Fleet were involved. What will be interesting is where the rest of the money comes from. Because as we know from the Clone Wars and the campaign on Mimban, conflicts can intentionally be drawn out in order to incentivize the Senate to pass funding bills. Funding which we know is pooled because, as we see in Rebels, Thrawn is upset because Krennic is pulling away money from his TIE Defender program. I think this is an official thesis, please, or prediction, but because Gorman is in 5 of the 12 episodes, it will be interesting to see both how and if that plays into any of Krennic's budgetary woes. Or maybe machinations is the better word. There are numerous additional comparisons that we can make with Robert Moses and Krennic. The destruction of Jeddah could easily be viewed as his straight line to success, so to speak. Go on for days about the many horrible things that Krennic has done in order to ensure that the construction of his grand work moves forward. I don't know, the entire beginning of Rogue One. In sum, before I let you go, there is one final quote from Catalyst that I feel like truly captures the ethos of both individuals. It makes absolute sense as to why Tony Gilroy made the comparison. At times, Krennic could almost forget that he was constructing an exceptional weapon, for it seemed more the case that he was creating a world he would one day govern. A world of his own, replete with a power to rival that of the Emperor and Darth Vader. That of the Imperial Navy itself. Moses and Krennic weren't content with just their work being the legacy. They wanted the recognition and to be there as well. Unfortunately for Moses, you will more often hear people talk about Central Park than the man behind it. Far more people talked about the Death Star than the individual who directed the project. Because of the Tarkin Doctrine and Tarkin himself, he actually received most of the credit. Are you blind? Deploy the... I don't know what to deploy. You filled in the blank. Okay.